So, what is energy? Well, we currently define energy as the ability to perform work, which is kind of like saying that a cat is the ability to reduce mice population. Both definitions say what the subject can do, but they say nothing about what it actually is. As far as science is concerned, energy is simply a value that equates to movement or force, which is fine for the niche sciences of material reality, but not for understanding the mechanics of awareness. So, what does understanding the mechanics of awareness have to do with energy? Well, the tholonic claim is that energy is awareness and intention. And this claim comes from the following argument. Reality, and everything that exists, does so due to the movement of energy. And that movement occurs only when there is a difference between two or more states or systems or instances of energy. Because it is the intention, it is the nature of energy to move only and always to seek balance. So, for energy to move, there has to be some kind of an imbalance in the first place. When everything is balanced, nothing moves. That is both true for a dead battery as well as the end of the universe, which, according to some theories, will just turn into one big, cold, dead, empty space. Because the energy is balanced. It doesn't need to move anymore. It's found peace. How, then, is awareness the source of energy? Well, in the tholonic model, the source of all existence is a single zero-dimensional conceptual point, which we'll refer to as a 0 point. It's conceptual because as a 0 point, it has no dimensions and it has no material properties, because it doesn't actually exist, at least not in the material world. But it does have two non-material properties, which are awareness and intention, as these were the only properties that brought it into existence. It has these two properties because if a 0 point exists as a concept, there has to be some form of awareness that is conceiving of it, and there must be an intention to have such a concept. Now, granted, the definitions, as we're using them here, of awareness and intention are probably a little broader than the ones that we're typically used to, but that's mainly because the context of how we use those words is significantly narrower than reality itself. So this 0 point is the first instance of awareness and intention. By coming into existence, it inevitably creates the first duality of somethingness and nothingness. And not just the first duality, but the most significant duality of existence. 1 and 0. Something, nothing. And that nothingness only came into existence because now there's a point in it. At least it only came into existence in our awareness of it relative to the 0 point. And given the intention of energy to seek balance, the only expression possible for an instance that only has the properties of awareness and intention can be to instantiate another 0 point of only awareness and intention. And as 0 points are zero-dimensional concepts, it doesn't consist of anything. So there's no limitation to their expansion. This is actually like a tholonic version of the Big Bang, which would explain how, a giant chunk of the universe was created by a very tiny chunk of the universe almost instantly. And this tholonic concept may not be a purely conceptual idea, as some versions of the Big Bang theory, quantum gravity, string theory, M theory, and other theories actually suggest that a 0 point of infinite gravity can create subatomic particles, which of course is what creates matter. Hence, matter can be created in theory, a singularity of infinite gravity. This, of course, raises the question, is gravity an instance of awareness and intention? Possibly, because consciousness, as we're defining it here, is a contextual instance of awareness and intention. That is, awareness and intention as it is expressed in the various forms and patterns created by the self-replicating points of awareness and intention. A contextual instance refers to how awareness and intention are expressed in limited contexts, such as people, plants, planets, galaxies, whatever. I mean, everything that exists, according to this model, must have some elements of awareness and intention. Because if everything was created by a point of awareness and intention, and energy itself is the balancing of the imbalance between these instances of awareness and intention, then everything that exists has the qualities or the properties of awareness and intention. So if consciousness is an instance of awareness and intention within a limited context, then consciousness is a form of awareness and intention. And the very first form, then, the very first instance of awareness and intention, which would have been this 0 point, would have essentially been infinite awareness and intention. And while that in itself doesn't make the case that awareness and intention is gravity, although it does kind of point in that direction, it does present the possibility, which we'll investigate actually in another video, that consciousness and gravity are two instances of the same archetype, but in different contexts. So we have this model where there's a self-replicating 0 point that forever and instantly, I guess at the same time, is replicating itself. And it's replicating itself by creating an instance of itself that is identical to itself. Now, while this is not a form of self-awareness necessarily, it is quite clearly an archetype of progenation. That is, roses come from roses, dogs come from dogs, etc. But it is also an archetype for self-awareness as well, if we consider or accept that the concept of I am can beget the concept of I am. And this would especially be the case if we accept the idea that the concept of I am that I am is a declaration of self-awareness. And for those of you out there who are not up on your Old Testament, I am that I am is the name of God as it was revealed to Moses on Mount Sinai when he had the vision of the burning bush. The Aramaic word Jehovah is literally a translation of that concept. I don't think it's coincidental that the concept of the one God in the Western world, at least among the Muslim Jews and Christians, is completely in line with the idea of a self-replicating point of awareness. And as this archetype is both one of progenation as well as the religious concept of one God, we have a really interesting relationship now between the concept of one God and the concept of genetics, as genetics are the mechanics of progenation. So how exactly does awareness account for reality? Well, the general idea goes something like this. We have this self-replicating 0 point. Now we have 2 points, and there's a relationship between these two instances of awareness and intention. And we describe that relationship as a line, because a line is what connects 2 points, or 2 points is what defines a line. The relationships of these lines create forms and patterns, the simplest of which is a triangle. That's the first 2-dimensional form. These triangles form relationships, the simplest of which is a tetrahedron, which is the first three-dimensional form. These tetrahedrons also form relationships, the simplest of which is the cube, as two tetrahedrons describe a perfect cube. And while the tetrahedron is the first three-dimensional object, the cube clearly defines the coordinates, the structure of manifest physical material reality. While the cube might represent the mechanics of physical reality, it is the tetrahedron that represents the mechanics of awareness. Or more specifically, perhaps, the mechanics of energy. But as we are saying, awareness is energy. However, the math, the structure of tetrahedrons works omnirationally, energetically, arithmetically, geometrically, chemically, volumetrically, crystallographically, vectorially, topologically, and energy quantum-wise. And that's not me saying that. That's Buckminster Fuller saying that in his groundbreaking work, Synergetics, Explorations in the Geometry of Thinking, where he makes the very solid case that tetrahedral structures are the geometry of thought, which we're extending here to the geometry of awareness, which is the geometry of energy. So these forms, which continue to build on each other, continue forming more and more complex and multidimensional and, sophisticated and compound structures and systems, because there's energy moving through all of these forms and patterns. And how the energy moves through these patterns determines the function of those patterns and how those patterns can evolve or change or adapt. We refer to these forms and relationships and patterns as contexts. Atoms, molecules, cells, organs, plants, galaxies, those are all examples of contexts, because each one of those represents a particular pattern of energy that came into being as a result of the relationships between these non-existent 0 points that formed dimensional reality, 1, 2, 3-dimensional reality. And the reason they exist, the reason there is energy in these forms, is because there is a difference between each point and each form and each superform and each iteration of forms upon forms upon forms. Each one of those has its own system. For example, how the atoms make the molecules make the cells make the organs make the being, the beings make the nations make economies, whatever. You get the idea. Systems within systems within systems. All of them different from each other, and therefore all of them needing to transfer energy, balancing themselves. But this balancing act is not simply between two different instances that are different. It's between countless instances embedded in each other that are all different. And that is the definition of nature. That is the definition of why and the reason why everything works the way it does. Because everything is a delicate balance of imbalance. That is what nature is. It is the balance of imbalances. All of the imbalances have to work together in order for the whole system to have a net balance. But the imbalances in the internal systems, the subsystems, have to remain imbalanced. Otherwise, there would no longer be this movement of energy. In actual practice, in the functional reality, of how these things work, each independent and unique 0 point has a different quality. All have different qualities depending on their relationships to the other points around them and the other relationships around them. But these contexts are not just limited to the physical things. It applies just as equally to conceptual creations. such as the ideas of nations or archetypes or cultures or ideologies or beliefs or theories or etc. So that's the super duper short version of how a conceptual point of awareness and intention ends up creating the physical reality that we live in and all of the other realities that exist. Although it should be mentioned and stressed that this model is a description of how the mechanics work and how these things come into existence, which is different from the actual reality of how they work and how they come into existence. The description allows us to understand and predict and model the functioning of a system. And an example that I've used before is weather, where we predict the weather by creating an embedded grid system, and we look at the attributes inside a grid and add those up and look at the bigger grids and then the bigger grids, etc., etc. But that's not how weather actually works. So it's important to remember that the tholonic model is a model that describes how something works and is not the reality of how it actually works. And this is easy to imagine because if we think in 100 years or 1,000 years, any model that we have today is going to be described radically different in the future as it was in the past. The reality stayed the same, but the model changes depending on our understanding of the reality and the world around us. And part of the tholonic mission, as it were, is to include a perspective that goes beyond just the physical reality, because there are many, many realities that are non-physical that have a profound effect on the way things work in the physical. But these are realities that currently science has no interest or ability to look into, but they're still there. From this model, we can say the following. Everything comes from nothing, that is, a conceptual zero-dimensional point. The smallest particle that can exist is a zero-dimensional point of awareness and intention, which only exists in awareness, so technically it's not really a particle. But as we continue digging for smaller and smaller and smaller particles, at some point we're going to find a particle that doesn't even exist, which is this particle. I wonder what they'll name it. Everything that exists has the attributes of awareness and intention. We can say, in the broadest sense, that awareness and intention are qualities of existence. Every single thing that exists has the qualities of awareness and intention. As these forms build and become more complex and more compounded, and depending on their context, those qualities come together to become more significant, to become more expressive of awareness and intention. And we could say that human consciousness, which is probably one of the top, if not the top forms of consciousness on this planet, maybe dolphins and whales and a few other animals might have such things, is one of the most coherent or expressive forms of awareness and intention. And one of the indicators of that is self-awareness. But this self-awareness in humans, it was qualified as a physical instance, a consciousness in a physical instance, us humans. Other entities also have self-awareness that don't have physical instances. And a perfect example of that is ants. The collective consciousness of ants is self-aware, but it only instantiates through what we see as ants. Think of them as what cells are to bodies, these ants are to the consciousness of ant. But that consciousness, which only exists in a non-physical reality, is self-aware, has very clear intentions. And the reason I say this will be the subject of another video that is completely outside the realm of the traditional analytical thinking and reasoning. It was a very mystical, entheogenic, indigenous experience that I was fortunate enough to be able to have. And the name of that video is going to be The Ant God. So if that's of interest to you, watch for it. Okay, so let's get back to the points that were being made. Energy, as we currently understand it, is the intention to balance the difference between two or more contextual instances of awareness, which are those points, lines, patterns, forms, and then ultimately, molecules, atoms, electrons, protons, planets, etc. The movement of energy between these contexts always follows the path of least resistance, and an example of that is how 2 points create a line. I guess we could call it one of the basic laws of existence is that the most fundamental relationship between 2 points is defined by the shortest path between them. The line has to be a straight line. This movement always moves from the instantiator to the instantiated. That is, from the parent to the child, or from that which exists to that which is being created, or from high energy to low energy. I guess we could also say from the creator to the created. In the process of self-replication, there's a creator and there's a created. And this last claim is the second law of thermodynamics, which states that heat always moves from hotter to colder. But here, instead of energy expressed as heat, it is expressed as a state of instantiation or existence. However, if energy is awareness and intention, and instantiations are instances of awareness, the only difference between the law of thermodynamics and this tholonic claim is the contextual instances of awareness and intention. This would also suggest that the process of, for example, biological reproduction and the process of, for example, Newtonian mechanics are 2 instances of the same pattern but in different contexts. And as wild as that sounds, when we apply Newtonian mechanics to such areas like social theory, economics, psychology, and even drug addiction, we find surprisingly meaningful results. There's going to be videos on that in the future. But that last claim, as well as being the second law of thermodynamics, is also Newton's first law of motion, which states, in short, in the absence of any external force, the state of any object will remain unchanged. In our case, this law is not limited to an object, but also applies to any instance or form or pattern, even conceptual. This is why a line between 2 points can only be straight. And it's the same reason why water runs downhill and your hot coffee gets cold after a while. And because Newton's first law of motion is made up of the same concepts as the second and the third law of motion, all of Newton's laws apply to awareness just as they apply to energy. For these reasons, the movement of energy can only move in one direction, that being the direction that is the shortest or most efficient path between 2 different states, and in the direction of higher energy to lower energy, or instantiator to instantiated, or creator to created, or parent to child, and so on. By extension, if we can say this about energy, and we say that awareness is energy, we can make the same claim about awareness, that awareness can only move in one direction for the same reasons, and is limited by the same laws in whatever form those laws happen to contextually apply. So the question really is not what is energy, but what is awareness and intention? And that is an esoteric, mystical, mysterious question that I don't think science will ever be able to answer, because when you actually look at what attention is, it's nothing. It's no thing. It is a point that doesn't exist except in your own awareness. It's a closed loop. It's circular logic that shouldn't make sense. But here we are. But the mechanics, regardless of how much sense it does or doesn't make, the point of the tholonic model is an attempt to explain and explore the mechanics of awareness in as rational a process as possible. And just like today, where we have electricity-based tools like light bulbs, drills, computers, and cell phones, because we understand what at one time, not that long ago, was considered a completely mystical, magical, divine force. In the future, once we understand the mechanics of awareness and intention, we will have similar utilities that will allow us to harness this tremendous power of awareness and intention in the same way we harnessed fire and electricity. In future episodes of this same theme, we'll be exploring some experiments that will put this idea to the test, including some past tests with really surprising results.